Hey everybody, Spear here, and we're back with another Archetype 101 for set 12, Vicious Rejuvenation. I know we missed one yesterday, guys. Some of the things came up, life happens, but we're still keeping on track. We're still pushing through, and we're just going to push up and release a Saturday video, I guess. But we are definitely going to make sure that every single Archetype is out there before the set is released so that you guys are ready for set 12. Before we get started, a couple things. First, I still have that Q&A announcement video coming out this Friday. So if you guys have any questions in regards to me, the games I play, the channel, or anything in general, I'll be answering all Q&As in that video. So the link will be in the little I or in the description down below if you guys want to submit anything for that video. On top of that, I do stream every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and on weekends for tournament runs. So if you guys want to catch me live, links to that will be in the description as well. But with that said, let's jump right into Mono Green Slug. Here, we'll get into the overview as I talk about it. Specifically because it's a group hug strategy, and it's the first time in this game that we've seen a group hug strategy. So group hug is a Magic the Gathering term, which refers to a strategy that gives your opponents benefits, but in reality, it works against them and you're gaining more advantage from those kinds of skills than they are. So oftentimes this relates to things like drawing. So I draw a card, but my opponents also get to draw cards. And this is the biggest thing that this archetype is doing, is that not only is it drawing cards itself, but it's sharing that card draw among your opponent. So that's that group hug strategy. It's like, oh, hey, like here, like let's both benefit from this. Let's both have some good things. But in reality, the way that your deck works is to benefit off the fact that your opponent is getting these advantages. It's free play based. A lot of archetypes in this set are free play based. You're getting a lot of things that just kind of pop off the field or into the field for free. Very typical of basically almost every single archetype in this format. And there's a parasitic chain, of course, Slug being one of the contenders for the parasitic DragonBalls, meaning that there is also a side chain. A pretty annoying one, actually. The body is pretty beefy, but we'll just jump right into that to look at it. And of course, we start with the leader. So here we have Lord Slug 10k. Can I? Alright, I'll get to that after. Auto, when this card attacks, you and your opponent draw one card. So great, you're getting advantage, but so is your opponent. Auto, if you have 3 or more green energy, when you activate a rejuvenate skill, draw 2 cards and flip this card over, which is kind of nice. It means you get an early awaken, assuming that you can protect yourself above 4 life till turn 3. And then all you really need is 1 with rejuvenate, which means you're also gaining a life, which means potentially you could be at 9 life and awaken, which is pretty sick. And awaken when your life is at 4 or less. You and your opponent draw 1 card. So instead of you just getting draw 2, your opponent gets a draw card, and you get to switch up to your energy to active mode, flip this card over. Draw 1, untap 2 is really, really good. Granted, your opponent draws 1, but for the most part, I mean, this is very much in line with what this deck and strategy is trying to do. And then we look at Lord Slug Rejuvenate. Okay, so this one, give me like this card art. Like, who authorized this? What is the creepiest look I've ever seen? It's literally just... So like, what are you grabbing onto there, Slug? And like, it's literally the same art between both pictures. Just like one has a cloak and one doesn't. So it's just like, I don't know, guys. This art hits me different, and I don't think that's in a good way. But we have Lord Slug Rejuvenate, a 20k base leader, which is huge. Defensively, that's awesome. Offensively, that's awesome. But he does have the permanent that if your opponent has 7 or fewer cards in their hand, this card gets minus 5k during battles on your opponent's turn, which means you need to force your opponent to have a lot of cards in hand to keep this at 20k. 20k is a very relevant body. It takes away a lot of aggro from a lot of go wide decks that we've been seeing in the meta as of late. But to do so, you need to make sure your opponent has a healthy sized hand, which in itself is very tough, and I'd argue I don't know if it's worth the benefit of being a 20k base leader. Auto, when this card attacks you and your opponent draw 1 card, so again going into that whole, hey, we're both going to keep a large hand size, and then activate main once per turn. If your opponent has 10 or more cards in their hand, you get to play 1 Mono Green Slug's arm card with an energy cost of 2 or less from your drop area. So not only is he a 20k base if you're at 7 cards, once you're at 10 cards, he gets to be able to free play battle cards. And those are things that allow you to go even further into your game plan. There's a decent amount of Slug's army cards that really allow you to benefit from the fact that they're on the board, as typical to every Slug archetype. So this is where we're seeing it, right? So this is where we're seeing that group hug strategy. Hey, we both get some cards in hand, but at the same time, I get a bunch of free stuff for being able to do so. My problem with group hug is the fact that oftentimes you'll have other leaders or other cards that can do the same thing, but won't have this weird restriction of giving your opponents a bunch of cards in hand. We already have a bunch of leaders that free play battle cards. We have a bunch of leaders that are 5 extra 5k on your own turn, granted, without a weird conditional for your opponent's turn. So my issue with group hug is that these are things that already exist. So for group hug to really be viable, you need to do some really powerful things to counteract the fact that these are skills we've already seen on other leaders before. But regardless, I'm not trying to get too much into the specifics. Let's just jump into the army cards themselves. So we have a 1-drop Lord Slug, Conqueror Restored, a 4K unique auto. If your leader card is a Slug army card, when this card is played from your hand, you and your opponent draw one card. And at the end of the turn, your opponent chooses one card in their hand and plays it at the bottom of the deck. So a lot of skills in this archetype will actually do this way of group hug, where you're giving your opponent a card, but at the end of the turn, it'll take away the amount of cards that you give them, mitigating the fact that you're just really giving your opponent a big hand. It's a temporary big hand, usually, for you to be able to go ahead and use your skills, and then once your turn's over, they go and reset their hand. The issue with this is that while sure your opponent doesn't consistently go up in hand size, you're fixing their hand for them. So while it's not card advantage, it's a huge amount of card quality that you're giving your opponent, which is another aspect of the group hub strat that makes me feel, Regardless, activate main if your leader card is a Slug's army card and your opponent has 7 more cards in their hand and 1 or more energy, so you can't do this on turn 1. Choose 1 mono green Slug's army card with 19k power or less from your hand and play it. And you can't activate the skill more than once per turn, so again, more free play based on how big your opponent's hand size is. Then, of course, there's all the different army cards we can play. So we have Angela, Invader of Earth, 19k auto if your leader card is a Slug's army card and all of your energy is mono green. When this card is played from your hand, activate the skill. At the end of your turn, if you have 6 or fewer cards in hand and your opponent has 10 or more cards in hand, draw 3 cards. So kind of offsetting that balance. This card really makes sure that you and your opponent are basically at parity in regards to hand size most of the time. Also is really sweet because you can line this up with other triggers you have in the deck where you use this auto first and then your opponent has, and then you get to draw a bunch of cards and then your opponent goes off and gets rid of cards from their hand. So there's that nice dichotomy right there. Then there's Surprise Attack Angela, this being the TP promo, a 1-drop 3k. When this card is played from your hand, look at up to 5 cards from the top of your deck, add up to 1 mono green Slug's army card with an energy cost of 3 or less, or 1 mono green using card with a specified cost of 2 from them, add them to your hand, and then shuffle your deck. So this is just being a 1-drop searcher that's available in almost every archetype. I hate the fact that this is a TP, because some decks really do need their searchers, and for most archetypes, it's basically a common in the set. This being a TP is kind of annoying because it's really just a consistency piece. So it doesn't do anything interesting. It doesn't do anything wacky. It's literally a card we've seen printed almost for every single archetype. But because Bandai felt they needed to put this behind a promo paywall, they're like, okay, well, here's some consistency. So I don't know. Slug decks are probably going to need this. You're probably going to need to pick up your copies if you want to run the deck because of the consistency and because this deck really wants to see its unison. But I don't know, I'm not a fan of having like these searcher type promos that are like common level power level in TPs. It's a little meh. Either way, we have Metamacha, Invader of Earth, 2-drop 10k, activate main for 1 green if your leader card is a Slug's army card, all of your energy is mono green, and you send this card from your drop area of your warp, add 1 card from your life to your hand, play 1 meta token, then you and your opponent draw 2 cards at the end of the turn. Your opponent chooses up to 2 cards from their hand and plays them at the bottom of their deck. You can't activate the skill more than once. So again, more of this, hey, let's both draw, but at the end of the turn, you're actually going to end up losing those cards. And for a bonus, you actually get a token on board, which also helps with the fact that a lot of Slug stuff has bond. Then we have Wings, Invader of Earth, 3-drop 19k permanent bond 2. If this card is in rest mode, mono green Slug's army cards in your battle area can't be KO'd by your opponent's skills, which is a really nice effect. It also includes himself, which is nice. Typically skills like this we've seen in the past, like with Jiren, don't include themselves. The fact that this does include itself is really sweet. So a great consistency card to mitigate the fact that board wipes, the deck's quite vulnerable to them, especially with the bond skills. So this mitigates for that by being, hey, you know what, to deal with us, you're gonna have to deal with me first, and you're gonna have to do it in a way that either negs my skills or just by attacking into me and killing me. And then finally we have Goryoshu, Invader of Earth, 2-drop 15k super combo. If you have a rejuvenate card on board, you can go ahead and slice a card right under it. So in this archetype better than others because 1, not only is this a searchable super combo, but 2, because it actually really helps in setting up your rejuvenate, which is what this deck wants to do. When we look at the Parasitic chain specifically, we have Lord Slug Return to Life, a 19k 3-drop. This one coming from the TP promos. Auto, if all your energy is mono green, when this card is played from your hand, you and your opponent draw 1 card. Then you choose up to 1 of your opponent's battle cards and KO it. At the end of the turn, your opponent chooses 1 card in their hand and plays at the bottom of the deck. More of this, hey, group hug draw, and then at the end of the turn, you put it at the bottom of it. Alternatively, we also have this other 3-drop, Lord Slug, Thwarter of Plans, 15k 3-drop. Deflect, which is great, it's going to hit board, and then Auto Bond 2, if your lead card is Slug Army card, when your opponent uses a card in combo, you may put that card in the drop area. If you do, your opponent draw ones and then negates the skill for the turn. The draw one's kind of boring because like it mitigates the fact that your opponent lost a card, so your opponent's never really losing a card on this, but they do lose a combo, which can be very relevant. These effects we've seen in the past have been very annoying. And then additionally an auto where when this card is removed from your battle area by an opponent's skill or it's KO'd, if your opponent has 7 or more cards in their hand, play up to 1 green slug on a card with an energy cost of 1 from your drop area, which is great. You get to go get that 1-drop slug to then set up again for being able to free play a bunch of cards. Of course, we have the 6-star Parasitic Ball where you can combo it away. If not, you can put it on a 3 or 4 cost slug to be able to go into Lord Slug Dark Parasite, a 4-drop 20k auto. If your opponent has 3 or more energy, when this card is played, your opponent may choose one of their unison cards and place it in its own drop area, which is great. This is one of the first hard unison removal cards we've seen in the game. Granted, it is optional. If they didn't, you and your opponent draw one card, then choose all of your opponent's battle cards and KO them. So either your opponent's losing their battle cards, it's a board wipe, or they're losing your unison, both of which are very powerful abilities. And it's tacked onto these punishing options that we've seen every single one of these parasitic archetypes have, where you know what, you get to do something, you get a choice, but you're not gonna like either of them, and I get the benefit from the fact that you get one choice or another. And then finally we have the Lord Slug Out of Control EX Evolve, 6 cost 25k for double green with triple strike, permanent. When this card is in rest mode, your opponent can't attack leader cards or unison cards, which is great. It means they're gonna have to clear your board. They're gonna have to deal with this Lord Slug. It doesn't have barrier, which is a bit of a shame. It does mean that skills will be able to get rid of it. But that said, you do have the benefit of that as an auto. When this card is removed from value by an opponent's skill, you get to play up to 1 green Lord Slug card with an energy cost of 3 or less from your drop area. With an energy cost of 3 from your drop area, then out to 1 Black Parasite from your drop area to your hand, which means you're basically restarting your chain. What? Did you deal with my Deadly Defender? Okay, well, you know what? I'm going to restart my chain all over again. So, a great consistency piece, especially on a big beefy body that you're just going to want to attack with, and then your opponent has to deal with it. And if he deals with it, he's restarting your chain all over again. When we look at the unison, we have King Piccolo Dimensional Conqueror, 15k 2 specified cost with Rejuvenate. Of course, Rejuvenate being that if there's a card under it and you remove 4 markers from the card, you get to gain a health. And then activate main 4 green if your lead card is mono green and your opponent has 7 or more cards in their hand. Play this card from your hand with a marker on it and you can't play unison cards for the turn. This is really great because it allows you to, pump out your unison earlier, which means that you have more energy to be able to extend your plays that aren't just your unison play. And then activate main 4/1 green, choose 1 card in your hand and place it under this card, which means it auto sets its Rejuvenate, which is great. You and your opponent draw 1 card, then you choose up to 1 green battle card with an energy cost of 1 in your hand and play it, which is great. We can play that 1-drop slug again to really start setting up our plays. At the end of the turn, your opponent chooses 1 card in their hand and plays that at the bottom of their deck, which means they don't get to keep the card. They do get some card quality, but they don't get to keep the hand advantage. Then we look at the closer of their deck. There is this 5-drop SR Lord Slug Monstrous Muscle, a 30k Deflect Double Striker auto. When this card is played, choose all your opponent's battle cards, KO them, which is a board wipe, which is phenomenal on a Deflect body. Then you get to choose 1 of your opponent's unison cards and remove 2 markers from it, which is great. It does double duty, especially being on a 30k Double Strike body. Probably means that if you really wanted to get rid of one of your opponent's unisons, you can definitely get there between the 2 marker removal and being a 30k Double Striker. Additionally, as an auto that once per turn, when your opponent activates a counterattack skill, your opponent chooses 6 cards in their hand, discard the rest, then you and your opponent draw 1 card. So this is one of those balancing factors, right? Your opponent's always going to have 7 cards in hand, but your opponent's never going to be in a position where they have 10, 11, 12 consistently without you doing something about it. So sure, your opponent will have a large hand size, a consistent hand size almost all the time, but nothing beyond that because you have skills like this one and the fact that cards go back into the deck at the end of the turn that really mitigate for the fact that your opponent is drawing cards over and over again. And with that said, that's Mono Green Slug, a Group Hug archetype, which is really exciting because Group Hug can lead for a lot of great different play and strategy in card games. But unfortunately, I think his skills do lean towards things we've already seen in other leaders in the game that don't have this restriction of playing around with your opponent's hand. So I think it's a really fun and cool archetype. I don't know if it'll be super competitive, but it's definitely something that if you pick up, there's going to be a ton of fun interaction between you and your opponent because of how interestingly different the deck plays out, which is very much a theme of this entire set, playing different is definitely the way to go. But I'd love to know how you guys would build it, because do you just commit to the entire regular chain? Does the old stuff work well with it? I think there are a couple of cards, you know, you have wings, which would help really well since it cheapens the cost of everything in your deck. I think there are some consistency cards in the old slug archetypes that could see some consistency boost here. With that said, guys, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. Hey, if you dislike it, thumbs down works too. And if you want to watch more of these Archetype 101s or any other content I make, subscribe button's in the corner. And with that said, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Ciao.